Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Allspaw, the state soil scientist for NRCS here in Oklahoma. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about Emmons Farms and the soil health journey that we've been on. I've worked with Jimmy and Ginger for approximately 10 years. Um, Jimmy contacted me about 10 years ago and was interested in changing the management on his operation. Going from a more traditional type of system to something that's more soil health focused and getting into the soil health management strategies that we've developed. So a little background on their farm. It's a mixed rangeland and cropland farm located in Dewey County. They have approximately 2,000 acres of cropland and around 7,000 acres of rangeland. So they do some crop production. They have about 300 cow herd, um, cow calf operation. Um, very traditional management. 10 years ago, you know, tillage was involved on the cropland. The cattle, weren't rotationally grazed necessarily. A lot of input costs. Um, wheat, canola, and alfalfa were the primary crops grown. So we had some element of no-till or minimized disturbance in those rotation periods where a field would have been in alfalfa. Most alfalfa fields will last, 7 or 8 years in fairly good condition, and then they'll be tilled back in and converted back to some kind of cropland production. Before they rotate back into alfalfa at some point in time. So here are the soil health principles that we try to live by to help rebuild that healthy soil coming out of especially in cropland situation where we have a lot of disturbance that has a huge impact on the biological community underground. Most of those soils are dominated by bacteria, and so we don't have a lot of diversity as far as fungi and some of the other underground biology. So these are the basic principles, and then the idea is how do we take these principles and convert those into some kind of management plan for a particular farm. Um, so the principles are plant diversity. We want to try and mimic what Mother Nature, had here hundreds of years ago when Oklahoma was mostly covered by rangeland. Most rangeland has a huge amount of plant diversity. You can find over 100 different species in a healthy rangeland. And, how do we adapt that to a cropland situation? Keeping the soil covered, in my eyes, is the most important. It adds that layer of protection from the effects of wind, rainfall especially, and then it helps to insulate the soil and moderate or control our soil temperatures. And here in the southern plains, especially on a cropland situation, I think that's the most important. It's very difficult to store water in the soil that heats up, well above 100 degrees. Your evaporation rates go through the roof, and we just can't keep that water if we can get it in the ground. Third principle is a living root as many days as possible throughout the year. In a cropland situation, that could be very difficult to get, 365 days. But in a rangeland situation, there's always something green out there. So we try to mimic that. And the idea is that those living roots are feeding that biology. The plants are exuding, plant exudates that help feed the biology. Those plants are trying to incorporate or get the biology underground to assist them in taking up water and nutrients and things of that nature. Managing our disturbance is the fourth principle, and that can be done pretty easily in a cropland or a rangeland situation. Tillage certainly is a disturbance. That's a major disturbance on cropland. Has a huge impact, particularly on the fungal community underground. But grazing can be a disturbance if those livestock are left there too many days, it has an impact not only on the underground system, but on the above ground. That plant community needs time to recover after a grazing event. And so we try to incorporate that into our management strategies. And then the last one is incorporating livestock into our system as much as we can. Water can be a limiting factor, especially in western Oklahoma. Um, but livestock kind of act as what I call a pre-processor. They're going to ingest, that plant material, um, digest that. Most of it's going to leave the animal out the back, and they've kind of pre-processed a lot of that material. Makes it easier for the biological system underground to cycle those the organic matter and cycle the nutrients and things of that nature. So these are the basic guiding principles that we use, and then the idea is how to take those principles and put them into practice on a farm. So my perfect soil, as a soil scientist, we've always kind of looked at the physical and chemical characters of the soil, um, mostly because those are fairly easy to understand. The biological community or component of that is much more complex in how those things work together. But ultimately, we would love to have our soils alive. We want as much biological activity in the soil as we can get. Uh, that includes a lot of organic matter, diverse organic matter, because that feeds all the different components of that biological community. Um, the organic matter is made up of approximately 60% carbon, and carbon is the key. It's the driving force um, for all of the organic matter and all those nutrients, its ability to store water and those types of things. We want fast, deep infiltration, and we'll talk about how some of that has changed on the Emmons Farms over the years. That organic matter provides surface area to store water, so we can have increased water holding capacity as well as increased infiltration. And in an area where the average precipitation is roughly about 24 inches per year, we want to get as much of that water in the ground as we can, and then store it so that we can use it for the things that we want to grow. Low density, we often looked at bulk density in soils. That's kind of how much pore space or airspace we have in those soils for water storage, but also for uh, gases moving in and out of the soil. Those plants respire at night and give off CO2, and we need to get that CO2 out of the soil, oxygen in to replace that, so that the underground biology has something to breathe um, during the daytime when they're active. So we want a very active ecosystems. We always want to be building, and along with that comes consuming the organic matter. So it's all a cycle. The organic matter cycles, all the nutrients stored within it are cycled, and then that system also plays a huge role in cycling water that falls from the sky, infiltrates in the soil, and then is used by the plants that we're growing. Um, and the last statement there is especially true in our cropland situations all across Oklahoma. Most of our ecosystem is starving for carbon. And like I said, it is the most important nutrient in the ecosystem. So here are some of the conservation practices that we've used. Grazing management is a really big one in this case. Like I said, they have about 3 to 4 times roughly as much rangeland as they do cropland. So grazing management on those native ranges is very important. But they also incorporate their livestock into their cropland situation. So grazing management on those is important. We do grow some cover crops, and grazing can easily be a part of that, but it's not a take everything situation. We want to take a percentage of what we've grown and then return the rest of that cover crop to the soil, to increase organic matter, to provide that residue and that cover on that soil. Crop rotation, that one has drastically changed over the years. We went from that wheat, canola, and alfalfa situation to where they grow probably more than a dozen different crops now. But some of those crops could not really be grown until we got that soil into a healthier state and better condition. Cover crops, especially on the cropland, is a big deal for us. Cool season or warm season depends on, what the cash crops are at the time. But those are the things that are going to provide that residue, going to provide the organic matter, and to help build that back up. Nutrient management, we'll talk a little bit about how that has changed over the years, but a lower need for synthetic fertilizer inputs definitely comes with time. And then, of course, no-till is one used on the cropland to minimize the disturbance as much as we can. So managing disturbance, particularly on cropland, is done, through the no-till. Many conventional or traditional systems use a lot of tillage. So we try to eliminate that. We don't want to see either one of the scenarios you see in the pictures here, where we have, bare soil that's exposed to the impact of raindrops, the impact of wind. We can get dust storms after a heavy rainfall event like this that kind of forms that crust on the surface. And once you've done that, you start getting runoff, and you'll get situations like you see on the right where we get pretty heavy sheet and reel erosion as that water moves off of those fields. So managing that disturbance is very important. So diversity, we want to look at, what did Mother Nature have here? We want to see a lot of different types of plants, different types of root systems. That's pretty easy to see in a healthy rangeland. In this particular picture, there's probably in that field over 100 different species of plants that grow in that situation. It's a little tougher to get that much diversity in a cropland situation, but if we're incorporating cover crops into that, we can bring that number up to probably 20 to 30 different species that are grown on that field at different times of the year. Soil cover, like I said, it's important for protecting that soil from the impact of raindrops, but also has a huge impact on soil temperatures. And for me, that's kind of number one. When we have that soil covered, we're in July and August here in Oklahoma are typically hot. You get a bright sunny day, a bare soil, we'll see soil temperatures of 130 to 140 degrees. And that makes it very difficult to store water in that soil. If we have good cover in this picture, you see we have a living cover, and then we have some residues from whatever grew before that still on the ground. That provides that insulation and helps control those soil temperatures. It's not uncommon to see 25 to 30 degree differences in fields that are covered versus uncovered. Living roots, this photo here is myself on the left and Jimmy on the right. This is on a cropland field near his headquarters. This is a cover crop that was put in after either wheat or canola harvest probably, which would have happened in June. Warm season cover was grown. And then some grazing was done on this particular plot. The cattle have already been through here. We took some of the better parts of the plants through the livestock, but we left a lot of residue there. And so that provides a good cover for the next crop that goes in there. In this case, it could be another fall seeded crop, or he could do another cool season cover and then go to a spring seeded or warm season cash crop the next spring. Livestock, the incorporation of livestock, we talked a little bit about how they kind of process a lot of the materials. The main goal here is you're going to get some kind of recovery in your cost for those covers through the gain on the cattle, but they spread manure and urine all throughout the field, so they kind of even out the nutrients across that field. Um, and they kind of jumpstart the process of breaking down the organic matter that we've grown there and getting it into that active cycling um, bank in that field. So some of the changes that we've seen that I'm going to talk pretty heavily on the first couple and then kind of glance over some of the other things we've seen, but improved infiltration is the biggest thing we've seen really. Um, he's got a couple of irrigated fields that, 10 years ago, he told me I can only irrigate, put on about a half an inch of water before I start getting runoff. And the last couple summers, we've done some infiltration testing out there, and we added 6+ inches of water in a 4-hour period and had no runoff. So the activation of the biological community underground, the earthworm activity in those fields has really increased the infiltration ability of those fields and those soils. And so we're getting more water in the ground where it can be stored to be used to grow the things that we want to do. So huge improvements in water infiltration. Organic matter increase. He's been tracking this on one particular field over the years through some grid sampling. In the first round was about 2013, roughly. Over 70% of that field was under 1% organic matter content. And today there are no areas in that field below 1%. So we're putting more carbon in the system than is being taken out or is being used. So that's important. That helps with, water infiltration, lowers the bulk density, gives us better water storage capacity in that soil, and it increases the nutrient cycling. A percentage of that is, in particular, is going to be nitrogen. And if we cycle a small percentage of organic matter per year, that feeds the plants that come along after these covers. And this is a cool season cover that you see in this photo here. That's primarily cereal grains, but you can see some cool season legumes. There's some radishes and turnips, Austrian winter peas. So we can add diversity in our covers by putting multiple species together. Started off with some fairly simple mixes that were, 6, 7, 8 different species. And now some of those mixes will have up 15 to 20 different species mixed together. So some of the other noticeable changes are increased irrigation efficiency. We talked a little bit about him only putting on a half an inch 10 years ago. Now he can add, 2, 3, 4 inches in one irrigation pass. That really vastly increases your irrigation efficiency. And he has dropped his water use by roughly 30 to 35% over the years. Lower synthetic fertilizer needs, at least 50% reduction in fertilizer usage, maybe more than that today. That's something that kind of comes in time as you build that organic matter bank back up and you start cycling nutrients, through the biological system. You just don't have to add as much nutrient to those fields. Lower fuel consumption for him personally is a big deal. I know at one time he told me his fuel bill had gone down by roughly 75% or so from what it used to be, 10+ years ago. Increased wildlife diversity, having those variety of different plants out there, something growing all the time, really draws the wildlife in there. I can remember him telling me a story about Ginger, his wife, was doing a pass harvesting something, I don't remember what it was, but on one pass around the field, the first pass around the outside edge, she saw 7 or 8 different coveys of quail. So you really draw that wildlife in. And that's important for them because they are wildlife-minded folks. And then the lower erosion and runoff rates, I think that's huge for water quality, um, not only on their farm, but for everybody downstream. When you have that soil covered, you just don't get as much runoff. You get better infiltration, and so you lower your erosion rates. So those are the major changes that we've seen over the years. We can adapt these um, conservation practices and strategies to any farm within the state of Oklahoma or anywhere in the country, really, and make some very noticeable changes. I think if you talk with folks who have gone this route, they figure out ways to make it more profitable as well. So hopefully that gives you kind of an idea of some of the changes and some of the benefits that we see when we change our management styles to something that's working a little bit more with Mother Nature than trying to control it. With that, I'm done, and I thank you.